The most prosperous period of Latin journalism is considered the phase between 1600 and 1750 for Europe. From that point of view, it seems to be anachronistic that the Latin press played a significant role in the publicity of the Hungarian Kingdom even after 1750. The list on the slide contains the titles of European Latin newspapers from the 17th, 19th, and 18th centuries that were published once or twice a week and covered cultural, political, and scientific information. I have highlighted the newspapers that were published in the Kingdom of Hungary and in Vienna. The Viennese periodicals are marked in red because they were not Hungarian newspapers in a territorial sense, but their topics and news were largely Hungarian, since some of their readers and in many cases their editors were Hungarian. The colors in the list show that from the very beginning, the Hungarian Neo-Latin journalism had a significant weight in European terms, and as we move forward in time, its weight and share increased, becoming dominant by the 19th century. To understand the Hungarian publicity of these Latin journals, it's important to take into consideration their connections to the new narratives of national identity and their local specialities as well. It's also important to understand and investigate the intentions behind the choice of language. As for the national identity, on the one hand, Latin was the language of law and public life in the Kingdom of Hungary until 1844. Therefore, Latin became the symbol of an independent Hungarian statehood and of constitutional independence, making it a suitable vehicle for expressing distance from the Habsburg emperors as well as aspirations to independence. In Hungary, due to its traditional role in public life, Latin could appropriately become one of the symbols of the feudal political community that was Hungarian nobility. On the other hand, the Latin language was considered a suitable means of representing multilingual Hungary as a cultural and political unity within the Habsburg Empire. Latin therefore became particularly important for non-Hungarian groups as the members of the German or Slovak-speaking bourgeoisie of Hungary. In this case, Latin again functions as a symbol of community, as the representation of the so-called Hungarus consciousness with its medieval roots. Finally, Latin was also considered an ideal medium primarily for those court-related efforts that aimed to represent the various linguistic and identity groups of the Habsburg Empire by means of a politically and culturally grounded sense of community. Because of the multilingual environment of the Kingdom of Hungary, Latin became, or remained, therefore, an important mediatory language in education as well. It was corroborated by the fact that the lingua franca of European science at this time was still primarily Latin. The interaction of these political and cultural factors enhanced the role of Latin in Hungarian social and cultural life extremely. The outstanding importance of Latin journalism in Hungary is exemplified by the first scientific journal published by the scholar Matthias Bél between 1721 and 2. Its title, Nova Posonienses, itself indicates an intentional identification with the scholarly tradition represented by the Leipzig journal Acta Eruditorum. Indeed, at the Evangelical Lyceum in Pressburg, Bél encouraged his Hungarian, German, and Slovak-speaking students to read the Acta Eruditorum from 1718. Bél, who had graduated from Halle University, was attempting to put journalism into the service of education, following the example of his former professor, August Hermann Franke. The goal of Nova Posonienses was therefore not only a knowledge transfer between the Hungarian scientific circles and the international scientific community. Its news section conveyed to students in Pressburg news from the wider world and from their homeland, augmenting their geographical, historical, and cultural awareness. Finally, collecting materials for publication in Nova Posonienses was an integral part of Bél's regional research project to give a description of Hungary and the Hungarian population as a whole. Therefore, he had to take into account the linguistic diversity of Hungary and consequently the linguistic diversity of its prospective readers. The Latin language offered an appropriately neutral solution to this problem. Therefore, the editor of Nova Posonienses was exploiting three functions of Latin simultaneously. Firstly, he was using it as the lingua franca of the Republic of Letters. Secondly, it was the official language of education. And thirdly, it was able to address as a community ethnic groups in Pressburg and in Hungary. This threefold social and cultural function of the Latin language gave birth to a specific genre of journalism in Hungary in the following century, which met real social needs. The so-called Ephemerides genre denoted a Latin language newspaper published twice a week. The term Ephemerides itself had previously been used to mean diary. During the 16th and 17th centuries, a special subgenre, the so-called astronomical ephemerides, also developed. The astronomical ephemerides was originally a table giving the future position of planet, comet, or satellite. Later, this subgenre became an annual publication giving the positions of the sun, moon, planets during the course of a year, information concerning eclipses, astronomical constructs. One of the most important astronomical ephemerides of the 18th century was also associated with Hungary. The famous astronomer of Hungarian origin, Maximilian Hell, published the Ephemerides Astronomici in Vienna annually between 1757 and 1792. The journal contained primarily astronomical tables, but also featured short studies and reports on the subject. Hell's journal was one of the specialist academic journals. Its target audience were skilled specialists of a scientific discipline. Medical ephemerides of the 18th century were aimed at a similar readership and had a similar structure, the best known of which is the Naturae Curiosum Ephemerides. However, the three Hungarian ephemerides that will be discussed in more detail cannot be called academic journals. The first of them, as its name Ephemerides Vindobonenses indicates, was also published in Vienna. Its publisher seems to have chosen Latin primarily because it was the language of education. Since the 1777 Ratio Educationis, Queen Maria Theresia's decree on education prescribed the reading of newspapers for educational purposes, there is every reason to associate with it the Ephemerides Vindobonenses, which was launched by the Croatian-Hungarian József Keresztúri in 1776. This association can be supported by a number of arguments. The invitation for subscriptions specifically highlights the paper's intention to provide useful reading matter for students. It was published twice a week, which, according to the Ratio Educationis, was precisely how often students in secondary schools were obliged to read a newspaper. The journal comprised two sections. Res Politicae features mainly Viennans and imperial news, while Res Literariae included book reviews and educational articles. According to its editor, the journal was intended for educated people, and the intention was to popularize science, following the model of the French Journal Encyclopédique. On the other hand, Keresztúri referred to a political profile of the paper, since it was aimed not only at Hungarians, but at all those living in the Habsburg Empire, especially Croats, Slavonians, Dalmatians, and Transylvanians. He made special mention of Poles as potential readers, in a good sense, since the Latin language still played a very important role at this time in Polish culture. It's no coincidence that the cover page of the magazine featured the imperial eagle and the coat of arms of the House of Habsburg-Lorraine, flanked by Kronos or Saturnus, with wings and scythe, and Mercurius, the god of messengers. The Ephemerides Vindobonenses thus aspired to be a representative of some kind of imperial community consciousness via the medium of the Latin language. It's worth noting that besides Hungarians, the large number of Croat readers, for whom Latin was a second language, are brought to the fore. Published between 1780 and 83 in Buda, the Latin language Ephemerides Budenses had strong association with the Ephemerides Vindobonenses of Vienna, both in terms of the Latin wording of the title and in terms of its main sections, Politica and Literaria. The political section often featured news from Vienna and Hungary, while the cultural section frequently contained educational news. The typographical similarity was reinforced by the use of A5 format and ornate frontispiece. The journal's image therefore suggests that it was published as a part of an existing tradition that was officially supported and recognized by the court. However, the date and location of the launch of Ephemerides Budenses coincide with the 1992 Diet, where the explicit goal of the Hungarian estates was to strengthen and extend Hungarian constitutional autonomy. The Ephemerides published continuous and detailed news about this Diet, and its tone was far from loyal to the court. Although the journal's expressive frontispiece is typographically similar to the emblem used in the Ephemerides Vindobonenses, it's very different in terms of content. Among the many crests that surround the emblem, the largest is the Hungarian coat of arms in the center, while the Croat coat of arms is also given a special place. At the center of the emblem is the royal castle of Buda, the remains of the Renaissance palace built in the 15th century by King Matthias, which was at this time perhaps the most impressive architectural symbol of the tradition of a previously independent Hungarian statehood. It is also remarkable that the Ephemerides Budenses apparently represents linguistic priorities entirely different from Ephemerides Vindobonenses. An examination of the journal's news and book reviews from this perspective reveals that outlines of an explicit program of language cultivation with a focus on the Hungarian language. The editor, Paul Spielenberg, in his programmatic statement that became known as Monita de Lingua al Teatro Hungarico Stabiliendo, gave a concise summary of this program. Spielenberg establishes that the development of the Hungarian language is an essential condition for the development of the Hungarian sciences, arts, industry, commerce, and national existence in general. It's followed by the list of the steps of a language cultivation program. The first step is the elimination of multilingualism in Hungary. According to the author, in non-Hungarian speaking villages and towns, it should be a legal requirement that small children be looked after by Hungarian speaking nannies and servants, so that they learn Hungarian through a mutual communication, especially if this is enhanced by the establishment of Hungarian local schools. The next step is to make Hungarian the official language. Finally, the position of Hungarian should be strengthened in the cultural sphere by the construction of theaters for Hungarian language companies and the creation of philological societies. The outlined program was influential in terms of the thematic composition of the Ephemerides. The journal contained a remarkably large proportion of news and reviews related to the development of the Hungarian language. Almost every issue included at least one item on the subject. In this context, the obvious question is why the Ephemerides Budenses choose Latin as intermediary language for a radical Hungarian language program. One possible answer is that by using the Latin language, the aim was to conceal and moderate the radicalism of the program, particularly with respect to the censorship. The editorial statements, as well as the type of and the nature of the articles, suggest that in using the Latin language, the editors were targeting those readers who had primarily learned about public events in other living European languages, German, Italian, or French, but had little access to local Hungarian news in these languages. This group can hypothetically be identified with teachers and students of newspaper reading seminars. The target audience also included readers from nobility who valued the traditional use of Latin and Hungarian of Latin in Hungarian public life, perhaps more than the potential spread of the Hungarian language. Finally, it included all those who were living in Hungary, but whose native language wasn't Hungarian, the mostly civic and intellectual strata who regarded themselves as Hungarus. Consequently, the Ephemerides was intended as the vehicle for an educational Hungarian language program. More precisely, Latin was functioning here only temporarily as a medium for the multilingual audience of Hungary. Its goal was to prepare the ground for Hungarian journalism and to broaden the base of readers who understood and preferred the Hungarian language. If the Hungarian language preferring program of Ephemerides Budenses had been as successful as its editor Paul Spielenberg had hoped, the third Hungarian Ephemerides, Ephemerides Posonienses, would certainly not have been created and wouldn't have been published for more than 3 decades. The full name of the journal was Ephemerides Statistico-Politico-Literarie, and it was first published in Pressburg in 1804. Its first editor was Georgios Bernai, professor of history at the Pressburg Academy. After his death, Antal Faber, also a professor of history at the same academy, took over the editorship, followed by István Cselko, professor of Hungarian literature. And from 1828, the editor was Pál Kovács, censor and teacher at the Pressburg Gymnasium and Bernays' son-in-law. As can be seen, the Ephemerides Posonienses was the longest living journal of the three Hungarian ephemerides, and at the time when Latin journalism had almost disappeared in Europe. In addition, Ephemerides Posonienses published several supplements in Bernays' period, Neu Videnses or Regnum Mortuorum, Appendix ad Ephemerides Latinas Complectans Physico-Economica Relationes Literariae. Later, Pál Kovács published a supplement to the newspaper under the title Alvare, which means beekeeper. It's also worth taking a look at the front cover. The engraving shows the coat of arms of the Kingdom of Hungary with the Holy Crown and with the inscription by imperial and royal privilege. It seems as if this journal wants to continue both the nobility-centered nationalist line of Ephemerides Budenses and the imperial concept of Ephemerides Vindobonenses. The two images of the emblem are linked to the mythical allegorical land Arcadia. On the right side, the figure with the lyre and the Pegasus represent poetry and humanities. On the left side, a landowner and the peasant plowing the field are allegories of agriculture and economy. This could be a reference to a wide range of topics covered in the journal: statistics, economics, culture, poetry, and aesthetics. On the other hand, it can also be interpreted as a fusion of the world of ideas and the practical world. The later interpretation will be confirmed by the front page of the Alvare supplement, which shows a beehive with inscription, Fundit cum nectare lucem, it gives nectar and light-giving vox together. This suggests that the supplement was intended to serve both a theoretical knowledge-providing educative role and a sweet, entertaining, pleasing aesthetic purpose. In the term of contents, Ephemerides Posonienses had the broadest spectrum of the three journals examined. It reports on political and cultural events not only from the Kingdom of Hungary and Europe, but also on a worldwide, universal dimension. Its readers were informed about the difficulties of Tokaj wine production, the death of Immanuel Kant, the storms in Louisiana, and the revolution and constitutional process in Haiti under Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Although the Hungarian press history suggests that the most of the news was taken by the editors from the Pressburger Zeitung, the more careful reader will see that the French Journal de Paris and English The Morning Chronicle were also important sources of news. This diversity, the placing of local and Hungarian news and events in a universal context, is also decisive in the composition of the supplements. The Regnum Mortuorum supplement was long regarded as a Latin translation of the journal Politische Gespräche der Toten or Neuwieder Zeitung, published by Moritz Flavius Tenk von Tonder in Neuwied since 1796. However, when compared with the contemporary Latin translation of the Neuwieder Zeitung, published in Vienna by Stefan Rosenmann, it's noticeable that Bernays supplemented the conversation of the famous dead persons discussing current European events with some Latin poems from Hungary, mostly occasional Latin literary writings related to significant local events. As the title and the cover of the journal indicate, the thematic and genre diversity also has given a significant role to the promotion of scholarly knowledge in disciplines that haven't been the part of the spectrum of Latin journalism earlier. On the one hand, the professional knowledge of statistics, political science, and economics is given a prominent place in the pages of Ephemerides Posonienses. On the other hand, this journal also includes literature and poetry, not only by book reviews, but by publishing various genres of fiction and essays on contemporary aesthetics. Considering that the editors of Ephemerides Posonienses were teachers and professors from institutes of Pressburg, it's reasonable to assume that the journal continued the tradition of the school journal Nova Posoniensia. The decision to use Latin may have been influenced by the multilingual nature of cultural life in Pressburg. However, the interest of Pressburg citizens alone wouldn't have kept the paper alive for more than 3 decades. By retaining the local news-focused character of Ephemerides Budenses without a radical Hungarian language program, and by placing the imperial cultural agenda of Ephemerides Vindobonenses in a universal context, Ephemerides Posonienses cleverly attracted to its readership both educated Hungarian nobles and German-speaking Hungarian citizens, regardless of their political affiliation. Although there are no data on the exact copy number of the journal, the fact that it can be found in several libraries in Hungary and Transylvania shows that it attracted nationwide interest. Its strong science popularization and literary profile, which was a novelty compared to previous ephemerides, may have played a role in this. On the one hand, in the first half of the 19th century, the possibilities for the dissemination of Latin literature, which belonged mainly to the manuscript publicity, were in decline, while Latin poetry itself was still very popular. The editors of the Ephemerides Posonienses were well aware that the publication of this existing literary segment, which was slowly being excluded from the news form of publicity, would generate interest among the public. On the other hand, the first half of the 19th century, the Hungarian vocabulary of sciences and professions was being developed and shaped. Thus, anyone who wanted to acquire up-to-date knowledge in economics, statistics, political science, or even aesthetics and philosophy could obtain information mainly from books and journals in German. The terminology of these sciences and professions was, for linguistic reasons, much easier to translate into Latin than into Hungarian. So the Latin language publications of the Ephemerides Posonienses were a good alternative for those who were well read in Latin, but less literate in German. The Ephemerides Posonienses wasn't therefore an anachronistic periodical for lovers of classical culture. Continuing the tradition of Hungarian ephemerides, it responded to real social needs for information and played a valuable role in the cultural life of the multilingual, multi-ethnic Kingdom of Hungary, even in the 19th century. Research in the cultural role of Hungarian journal genre, ephemerides, thus allows the exploration of important new aspects of publicity of the period and the needs of the contemporary journal reading public. However, these Latin journals, because of their Latin language, were increasingly excluded from the literary history researches during the last 2 centuries. The press history of the period only gives brief descriptions about them, and their more thorough exploration, translation, and contextualization are still waiting for. I hope that my presentation was a good initiative to assess the importance of this research. Thank you for your kind attention.